Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Lora O'Brien and John O'Sullivan. Fáilte. Hello, this is Lora O'Brien and I'm back with Dr. Gillian Kenny, one of our teachers at the Irish Pagan School. And we're doing a series on the topics that Gillian has taught classes. Today we're going to be talking about the sovereignty goddess. Gillian has many, many classes with us at the Irish Pagan School, so make sure you check the link below and you can have a look at what's available on demand. But in discussing the sovereignty goddess, Gillian, how do you find her representation in Irish mythology would intersect with the actual historical status and rights of women in early Irish society? Like we talked about folklore versus history, and you really put that one to bed in the last video. Make sure you check out the playlist at the end if you missed that one. But now we're talking maybe about mythology versus actual historical status, and how does that match up with this goddess?
It doesn't. So women were never sovereigns in early Ireland, but they were depicted as embodying sovereignty. It probably comes from like an Aryan tradition of the king marrying the land, the idea that the land has to be female because of course the land has to be dominated by the king. So there's the idea of the phallic insertion into the land, and you'll often find references to sovereignty goddess figures within the land of Ireland, but it's sometimes to places that you often get references to paps, the paps of Anu, which are breasts. Sometimes darker hidden crevices have goddesses' names. There are sometimes indentations in the land. There's a few which reference kind of Maeve's vulva.
Yeah, Maeve's a good one for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, well, so the representation, of course, of the land as a woman is to be conquered and subdued. And of course, women were great for that. I mean, early Ireland is a very conservative society. It's patriarchal. It's run by men for men. Women were there. They did have protections in law. They couldn't rule though. They couldn't generally work. There were exceptions. Their task was to bring up the next generation and to run the farms and homesteads. Things like embroidery were skills that were highly valued by women and amongst women in early Ireland. So women inhabit a particular position in early Irish society, which is not reflected in the kind of manifestations of powerful sovereignty goddesses that we find in the literature. And the sovereignty goddess, of course, if she withdraws her favour from the king, because even though she is overcome in a way and submits because she marries him, she can withdraw her favour. She has that power. And if she does that, then the king will fail. But she does it among a kind of very strict series of rules. So she can withdraw it, for example, if he turns out to be a bad king. And that might not be a bad king as we'd understand one, running around murdering everyone. But if it's, for example, he violates the ruler's truth, or he passes a bad judgment, which is part of that, and things like that. So she can withdraw it in that way. And then once she withdraws her favour, the king will fail, and so will the land unless they get rid of him. But so there's no kind of correlation between the power of women in early Ireland and representations of the sovereignty goddess. It does probably tap into an even older kind of even older than early Ireland's source book, which we're not fully aware of, but there are kind of links, it seems, from Aryan tradition, because of course there's the idea of there's the stories, there's later medieval stories which were told to blacken kind of Irish society by Gerald of Wales, and he said that in the king-making ceremony up in the north of Ireland in Donegal, that they led out a white mare and the king had sex with the mare and then killed the mare and ate it. Now, that didn't happen, okay? But certainly what may have happened in kingship ceremonies was a white horse was somehow involved. And there's a whole background to white horses in Irish history mythology, which we won't go into. But the white horse represented the sovereignty goddess who was there at the thing, because of course the link between Irish people and horses as representations of the land is also very old. So there's some kind of visual representation of the sovereignty goddess. They do come together. They don't have sex. They do come together. There is a horse there. It is blackened and used as propaganda later, but there is certainly some evidence, and it may be that at
Some
older,
memory of something,
yeah,
yeah.
this older sites like Audmacca, there may have been some kind of marriage feast that involved women acting as a cupbearer and also manifesting the sovereignty goddess in their person to the king, because the cupbearer is a uniquely kind of magical and ritualistic role. So it also confers the sovereignty on him. So there are hints and whispers of this in the literature and mythology that we can see and trace. So we know it was important. When we get to kind of later times, through a Christian kind of world vision, it tends to alter. But I think certainly, in the earlier period, there was some kind of magical union
Mm,
between man, the king as man, and some kind of representation of the land as a sovereignty goddess, whether that was in the person of a mayor or represented, manifested in the person of a very personage of a very important
mm,
woman within the king's entourage or kingdom. So yeah, there is something there. But interestingly, women were not in powerful positions
mm.
in early Ireland at all, really. I
I
think
have
is
I
very,
have a bit of a pet theory based on my studies of Maeve and Macha and the Tawn, Fidelm, all that, um, where there is some kind of folk memory in these mythologies of a priestess cult, right?
mm,
Which was very much based at specific locations around Ireland. And over the years and all my research, I keep getting hints of it and just, and you were talking in one of the earlier videos about a kind of a mosaic and having to put, and I have not got all the pieces. I really don't. But,
yeah.
and would you ever be able to prove it? No, of course not. But even like when looking at, say, the Morrigan, right? And the Morrigan's relationship on one hand with the Dagda and on the other with Cuchulainn, if we see the Morrigan as representing the sovereignty of the land, and both of these figures are in leadership positions. Now, I know Cuchulainn was not a king, but still had this, warrior leader role, which may represent a later look at the culture or anything like that, through the Iron Age, maybe. It's kind of like the good example and the bad example of like the Morrigan's encounter with the Dagda before Cathmachira, and then her encounter with Cuchulainn as King Buon's daughter, where she offers him her physical self, which has been read so many times about like that the Morrigan is in love with Cuchulainn, and he spurns her, so she's jealous and spiteful. And I mean, just take off the misogyny hat for a second, and
Yeah, that's what you're
you
dealing
know
with. Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah.
if you look at it in the sovereignty perspective and all the sovereignty traditions, and even the cupbearing, connected with Maeve and the Morrigan, and at the same sites and all of this stuff, I just can't. It won't go away that there's some kind of priestess cult memory there. So I don't know.
I mean, that would be, I mean, how fascinating would that be?
Mhm,
As some kind of intermediary to the sovereignty goddess, as some kind of
mhm,
way of tapping into it,
mhm,
which perhaps maybe male power couldn't do.
mhm.
I mean, gosh, that would be amazing. That would just be fantastic. But I mean, you look at will likely never be
No,
proven. But I
no,
think
no.
there is something to be said about the cupbearer. About there's something there. There's definitely something there. We see it in other cultures as well. You see it in Scandinavia. There's something about a woman as a cupbearer about bestowing power,
Mhm,
which is a powerful idea. And there's something about what you just said about misogyny.
mhm,
There's something about a sovereignty goddess turning her back on you and making you hate her. And there's something about in the Irish tradition as land, as power came away from Gaelic Ireland in the 16th and 17th centuries, what we see is a culture that turns its back on its sovereignty
mhm,
goddess. You
mhm,
see a culture that writes poems about the goddess being a harlot
mhm,
who's given herself to the English.
mhm.
You see the blame for what's happened being squarely laid at the feet of women,
Yeah.
and that happens for quite a long time. It's like the literati just sort of say, well, it's her fault, and they turn their back on her, and then you start to see it turn around and focus again, on kind of like the Kathleen Houlihan type,
The Gaelic
Pauline
revival
Vaughan
and
idea
yeah.
in the 19th century and into
Yeah,
that
but that's
into Lady
such a
Lavery
different
and
version, like
yes,
when she comes back, then it's this kind of sanitized, romanticized,
pliant. She's
she's
much more pliable.
yeah,
She's
and
much
she
softer.
becomes like the inspiration for the heroes and all of this. And
Indeed.
it's what we see in modern media as well, like the women characters just there as supports for the man's main story, and that's where it started from,
And
I
she's
think.
very pretty.
Yeah.
She's very beautiful.
Mhm.
Now, we don't know what a sovereignty goddess looks like, but I always think it'd be a bit like Galadriel when she's offered the ring,
Yeah, the big
sort of
scary
terrible to
bitch. Yeah,
behold.
yeah,
Quite scary because
yeah.
she manifests the power, she represents the power of land and land, the idea of the land sits in Irish people's minds. It inhabits a strange place that has never really changed. So I watched a program last night on Patricia Harl, the artist,
Mm,
and she's a member of a collective of older women called Nakailika, which I love because
mm,
they've taken it
mm,
and they're like, yeah, we're the hags, it's fine.
mm.
And they some of the women are not from Ireland and they talk about that. They talk about how the references to the land are almost there.
Mm.
Always there, as in,
Absolutely.
what you do with the land, where you are on the land, where you live on the land, and it's not about like owning it, it's about
Oh,
positioning
yeah.
yourself on it, where
Our
you are in
place,
relation
our
to it.
place in
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah.
It's where your place is.
It's our
So
touchstone, always. Yeah.
that's it. It's the anchor point.
Mm,
Now she thought it was. I think she was possibly German. It was not something she'd experienced in kind of modern. I mean, that could be a legacy
mm,
from not being industrialized and all the rest of it. But I think that's about manifesting that as a woman, who is, of course, because women were the caregivers. Women were the ones who brought forth children. Women did guarantee abundance and supply because they squirreled away the food and they did
mm,
all the good things. And I think the power they had was muted and has been muted in the
mm,
modern period.
mm,
That power to give and the power to take away,
mm.
which was crucial. So you could never piss off your sovereignty goddess.
Absolutely.
You had to do all the right things. And in the modern era, that's been cut off. She's not
Yeah.
been allowed. She's pliant. She's in her 20s. She's starting out. She's doe-eyed. I'm more inclined to think a sovereignty
Inspirational.
goddess is middle-aged.
Mm,
She's not taking any shit.
no,
And it's like, you don't stick to the rules, fella. It comes back off you. So we
absolutely.
can see how culture infantilizes women and
Mm,
how that has manifested in the more modern ideas in terms of
yeah,
19th and 20th century
yeah,
on who Ireland is, you
yeah.
know.
And our identity and, the romanticization and the minimization of her and even the sexualization, like it's all objectifying her, but it's also it's creating that distance, it's putting her in a safe little box, and that's the problem. That's one of the
And
problems.
it's less magical, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
There's less majesty, there's less ritual, there's less mystery
Mm,
because we approach the sovereignty goddess with caution
mm,
and we adhere to the rules she wants us to adhere to, and she comes as a figure of mystery
mm.
bearing the cup.
Yeah, yeah.
And even if it's portrayed by humans, when that's happening at that time, you always imagine there's a hush, there's a
Mm,
pause, there's
mm,
something else is happening here, something out of time. And if she's a woman on a on a note or on a pound note or on a painting and is beautiful and more of a supplicant, more of a choose me,
mm.
then that kind of ancient mystery is
Yeah.
gone.
She's
It
lost
doesn't
Maeve's
exist anymore.
power. Lost Maeve's power. Yeah.
We've lost the
Mhm.
power. Yeah, we've
Yeah,
lost the
yeah.
power of
Mhm.
that kind of that deep, kind of dark, really
Mm,
dark
mm.
hag power, which can hurt as
Yeah,
much as heal.
yeah.
And the hurt, I think, is what men haven't liked.
Mm. Of
Because,
course.
look, we see it elsewhere. Laura, remember in the witch trials across Europe, midwives were often the first to go. Why?
Mm, mm.
Because they also often laid out the dead, and because men used to think, are they hurting my baby or are they
Mm,
helping? Because
mm.
women's
Because
mysteries.
they didn't understand.
So
Yeah. And
they
they,
didn't understand. So it's the same with that, I guess, as
yeah,
well. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I know that you have to go now, Gillian. So we're going to finish up there. We could actually be talking forever, I think, me and you. But we do have a
Yeah,
couple more topics to cover. So we're going to come back to this in our playlist. So make sure you check out the playlist at the end and subscribe to the channel and check out Gillian's classes, which are linked below. She has multiple classes at the Irish Pagan School, and they're all amazing and absolutely go into these deeper dives. So thanks a million for your time, Gillian, and I will see you in the
thanks,
next one.
Laura.
Slán.
Thanks, Mel.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to irishpaganschool.com and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.